this is the brand new Suunto Race, featuring full global topographic mapping, an AMOLED display, heart rate variability, and plenty more. I've been using it for the last little while, from swimming to cycling to running, including hiking a 12-hour, 60-kilometer mountain route that you see right here, as well as some time this past summer in the French Alps doing a whole bunch more hiking as well. This could be Suunto's best watch ever. The question is, what are the catches? What are the things that might stop you from saying this is the best watch ever? That's what I'm gonna do in this review. I'm gonna tell you if this is the watch for you and where it looks super well and where it needs a little bit of love. So just getting right into things, the very first thing to know about this watch is the price. It is priced at $449 US, 449 euros for the base edition, which includes 16 gigabytes of storage for mapping and whatnot. Or there's the titanium edition, which is 32 gigs, which is what you see right here with the titanium case. That is an astoundingly cheap price for Suunto as well as compared to their competitors, and arguably probably one of the most important things about this watch. Now, its standout feature is this 1.43-inch AMOLED display, this brilliant color display right there that you can see. It's effectively the same watch, though, as the Suunto Vertical under the covers in terms of all of its software features. There are new software features on the Race, but the Vertical is getting the same thing, whereas this MIP-based display here on the Suunto Vertical, especially with the Solar Edition, gives you longer battery life. Now, from a battery life standpoint, the Suunto Race has 12 days in gesture-based mode in terms of smartwatch mode, or about 7 to 8 days in the always-on display mode. There is indeed two different display modes on it. As you can see, the time is shown right there on the screen, but it's in a dim state. Whereas when I raise my wrist like this, it'll go to full brightness like you see right there. Now, when it comes to GPS battery life, I'll talk about that a little later on, but it's super impressive. I've got an entire section on that, including the data from that super long hike to show you what it looks like in the real world. First, so let's just walk through the widgets here, and then from there we'll get into the sport bits, and then from there into the mapping and navigation components, then the battery life, then the GPS accuracy, and then finally the heart rate accuracy, and of course, my final recommendations. So this, as I mentioned before, is the watch face, and one of the new features here are these different training status components at the bottom. So you have TSB there, or training stress balance. If I tap that, just wake up screen there, I got my steps. Tap it again, I got my HRV, or heart rate variability. This is new on the Suunto Race, and I'll show you this in just a second down lower on. Tap it again, I've got my CTL, or my chronic training load. Of course, you can change the watch face as you see fit. There isn't like a massive Suunto watch face store, but there is a handful to change to and to customize. Scrolling through this, I can use either my finger right there, or I can use a digital crown on the side. So this watch does have two dedicated buttons, plus the touchscreen itself. And of course, this is the optical heart rate sensor on the back. The band or strap that you see right there is a standard 22mm band, meaning you can swap it out. Suunto also has like an entire selection of different bands there that you can buy from them. I've been using the red band. Obviously, by default, it comes in the black band. And I say obviously because, of course, I never bothered to show you what's in the box, which is right here. My only quick, 12-second take on the box is, I appreciate it's a beautiful box, but it's twice as big as it needs to be, 3 times as big as it needs to be. And Suunto's talked a lot about sustainability and environmental causes, and this isn't super sustainable. But I think they get that after my initial discussions with them, so hopefully they'll give it a chop and it'll be good to go. Oh, hey, and a quick note before we go on to the next thing. If you are finding this review interesting or useful, just simply whack the like button at the bottom there. It really does help with this video and the channel quite a bit. Now, back on the front side here, as I mentioned earlier on, you can go ahead and scroll down into these widgets. You can see the control panel there, logbook, timer, notifications. One downside, by the way, with notifications is there's no emoji access, so it's not something you're going to see there. You'll see a little square when that comes in. Hopefully that's something they can change in the future. You'll see heart rate, blood oxygen, resources. That's kind of like Garmin's body battery. Basically shows your energy levels throughout the day. If I tap into that, you can see this throughout the day. Those periods where it's missing there is where I've had off my wrist for, frankly, taking photos for this review. I can then swipe back right here and go down, and you'll notice that lag. And I have, I'd say 3 total criticisms about this watch. And the first one here is the lag. The lag is not great. And you'll notice that when you scroll through stuff, watch as I scroll down and open up the heart rate variability data page. So going on down here we go, tap this, open it up, and it lags, boom, and then it shows up. And this does it for all the different widgets. And it's primarily in this stage here, this area, not like in the sport modes per se, it's really just in the general UI. But it's also when I raise my wrist, it generally takes 2 seconds for it to show up, to go from dim state or off if it's off to the full brightness, which is a really long time for watches. Just a quick update since I shot this last night. I just got an email from Suunto saying that raise to wake being really slow, they've got an update coming for that on Monday, so I'm gonna just delete this whole section of the review and just keep on going from here. Now going back into these widgets, there's widgets for everything. For example, steps that you can see right there. You can crack that open. Again, that little latency right there. Going on down, the steps for the last 7 days, average calories. You can change your targets, etc. And all of this you can see on the Suunto app as well. Here's a couple screenshots somewhere on the screen showing that. Going down here is sleep. There are some changes in the sleep, but again, that slight latency there. This Friday night was, by the way, when I forgot the charger here at the office and went home, and it was at 2% when I went to bed. So it did not capture sleep that night, but no worries. You can see again, I swipe down. Here's my last night's sleep information, average heart rate, fell asleep, woke up times. These were all spot on. I've had no problems with this. It's been really a good job on terms of tracking the sleep times as I went to bed and woke up. And then as far as sleep stages, this is new here to show you this on the watch, the sleep phases or stages. It's not something I track, and the reason why is that the comparative technology to compare against this from an accuracy standpoint just isn't that accurate. It's only the mid-80s at best accuracy percentage, which again, if you were comparing like heart rate to something that was only accurate 80% of the time, like we wouldn't do that. That'd be bad, right? So anyways, that's there. Also, you'll get a morning report of sorts each morning when you wake up. Not like the exact second you wake up, but pretty close thereafter, a couple minutes. It'll show your sleep from the night before. And the nice part here is on the Suunto Race, they're now keeping that display page there for a lot longer. And now one of the new features with that from a sleep standpoint is your heart rate variability. So going on down here, you see the recovery HRV. And you can see that's my 7-day average at 45 milliseconds, a little bit low for me. Opening this page up here, you see essentially your heart rate variability status in the zones that you're in. These zones will take 14 nights of sleep to develop, and then they'll keep on adjusting over time to basically form your baseline. So right now you can see it's in my kind of lower zone right there. And you'll notice that the normal range is 47 to 54, and then this would be high or low. There's various factors that influence HRV. That can be alcohol, it can be lack of sleep, fatigue, high training, it could be other drugs, both good and bad, whatever the case is. There's a lot of things that will impact this. So you got to look at this and understand why something's being impacted. And if we scroll down here, you'll see your HRV is below normal, indicating poor recovery. Again, that's correct, but I'm not super concerned about it because I know what's causing that particular item. And then here we can see those HRV values of the last 7 days relative again to the baseline, as well as the sleep duration this week and so on. Now backing out of this into the main page here, as we start transitioning towards the sports side, you'll see a couple things here, including my TSB, my CTL, and then within this we'll also see your TSS, which is your training stress score. Those are training peaks metrics that Suunto has put here as well. So if I crack this open, CTL is my chronic training load, and it's nice that you can see this here. I can scroll down, I can see basically some running estimates as well, and these are all internal Suunto algorithms. So this is the very first watch that's completely using internal Suunto algorithms as opposed to licensed ones from companies like Firstbeat, which Garmin bought a couple of years ago. Suunto has finally transitioned off of all those. If we go up to the recovery training right there, tap that open, you can see there's my TSB. I'm basically fatigued, but I am gaining fitness. And then finally, under the training section, you can see your TSS score as well, your training stress score. Now, the only small nit I have with all these things here is that you see on the front page that CTL on the watch face, not the front page, but these numbers right there, those have like a weird update latency, which doesn't quite match. And even like where this little dot is isn't quite correct. The dot is always in the middle of each one of those color sections on the watch face versus everywhere else it's correctly aligned to where it should be on this. Again, minor things. Suunto says they know about like the sync update issues that I was talking about a second ago, and those are being fixed in the next firmware update. Okay, so let's talk about sport modes. To access sport modes, you're going to swipe up there and you'll see all the different sport modes organized by the most recent ones that you've used. If I crack one open right here, we're going to use the running one, for example. You'll see at the very top here in just a second when it finishes rendering, I've got my GPS status and my heart rate status. If I was in the indoor cycling, for example, or any cycling one where I had a power meter connected, it would show that status. Now you can connect sensors to the Suunto Race. The only downside is you can only connect one type of sensor per type, or one sensor per type, so I can only connect one power meter. If I have a smart trainer, I have to disconnect a power meter from my bike and vice versa, and even that I can't even see what power meter I connected at all. There's no like information about what I've actually connected to it. That's just not competitive in 2023 or even 2018 or even 2012. Like Suunto really needs to up their game on the sensor side, especially as sensors are becoming more and more important to these watches. Nonetheless, these are all your different settings right there. So you've got battery performance modes that you can set, or basically battery modes depending on how much battery you want to burn. These will change various settings behind the scenes to give you more battery. In general, just keep it on performance mode because that's where you get the best accuracy. We'll talk about navigation later on. You can change the map style from light to dark. And then there's the Suunto Plus apps. So these apps here are essentially different apps that both Suunto and third parties have developed, and you can enable them. You can enable up to 2 apps at a time, or you can enable 1 app and 1 guide. So guides down at the bottom are structured workouts in general. You can do things beyond structured workouts, but structured workouts is the core of it. And in fact, in Suunto's app, like their mobile app for your phone, you can create a custom workout like you see here on the screen, and then sync it to your watch. It's nice. This is all good stuff. The apps are really good, and they have a ton of partners out there, and they're doing good work. The only problem is that Suunto is using this as a bit of a crutch at this point. These are functions that the majority of the Suunto ones, the ones that are developed by Suunto, should be in the firmware itself, as opposed to little plug-in apps. The reason Suunto wants to do that is it can speed up their firmware development timeframe. The downside, though, is that because you have a limit of only doing 2 of these things at once, or 1 of them plus a structured guide of some sort, that means that there's a lot of features that their competitors have that are built into the watch that you have to choose either or type of scenario. Anyways, when it comes to customization of your data fields and whatnot, you can use the Suunto app, that'd be the big app, the phone app, if you will, to do that. The only downside here as well is that while you can customize these all you want with tons of data fields and lots of data fields per page, it's great. It's like, good job on the customization. Once you create your sport mode, you can't customize it again. You have to recreate it, which is a substantial pain in the butt, to be honest. But that's something that hopefully they can fix down the road, though they haven't fixed it for many, many years. But backing out here, back up to the top, once you're ready, you'll just simply tap the start button, and once you have GPS if you're outside, and you're off and running, literally in this particular case. You can see some of the data fields from my run from this past weekend, data pages, if you will, on the screen right now. A couple different options that I have there. All of this is essentially the same as the past, except with a much more brilliant display. Speaking of which, from an AMOLED display standpoint, I've had 0 problems with this. I've used it in bright sunny conditions in Hawaii. Here's middle of a lava field in the sun just a few weeks ago, and no problem seeing it there. No problems in the dark. In fact, actually, that's the best scenario for an AMOLED display, is in the dark. But again, the AMOLED displays of 2023 or even 2022 or 2021 are not the same AMOLED displays of 3 and 4 years ago. They are drastically brighter and drastically better. Now, once you're done with your workout, you can go ahead and save that workout, and you'll see all of your stats on the screen there. Again, tons and tons of stats that you can scroll through. You'll also see these on the Suunto app if you sync to your phone, which of course you would. And then if you have it connected to Strava, Training Peaks, etc., it'll all show up there. So with that, let's talk about mapping. This has full downloadable maps on it. As I mentioned earlier on, there's a 16 gig and a 32 gig version. Frankly, the way Suunto does these maps means that it doesn't matter how much storage you have, because they break the maps up into such small chunks that you're unlikely to fill up even the 16 gigs if you tried. So to download maps, you need to first go ahead and connect up this watch to a Wi-Fi network. You can save multiple Wi-Fi networks. I have one here at the office and one at home and so on, my phone, etc. And then you'll use the Suunto app to choose a particular map region that you want. And you basically go by country and then down into all these named regions. And they have, again, broken this up into very small chunks in the grand scheme of things. And I think if you travel to places that you know well, for example, if you live in the United States and travel to another state, super straightforward. By the way, if you're looking for California, it's broken up into Northern California and Southern California. Bit wonky if you're looking for the C and don't find it there the first time around, but FYI on that. If you're traveling to countries that you may not know those region names, which usually aren't aligned to city names, then it can be a little bit tough to figure out what the region names are. Like this past spring, I was in Turkey and I had no idea what the region name for the region I was in was, just off the top of my head, or the regions I was traveling to. So I do wish Suunto made it a little bit easier to drag a dot somewhere and be like, this is where I'm going, download the map for there. But again, that's just a very minor criticism in the grand scheme of things. Anyways, with your maps downloaded, it's time to get a route loaded on here. You can use the Suunto app to, again, create a route if you want to, using heat maps and all that kind of stuff. Suunto is got one of the best kind of map creators out there in terms of having all the heat map data. Or you can pull in routes from Strava and Komoot. One thing to be aware of, though, if you're pushing maps to the Suunto Race, is that you want to ensure that you create them in the Suunto app and flag the option that says to have turn-by-turn instructions. Otherwise, you won't have the turn-by-turn alerts as you go along. Now, sometimes you may not want the turn-by-turn alerts. On a lot of my really long hikes, I don't honestly want that because it's just annoying to have the beep on every single switchback. So I don't bother with that, but just something to keep in mind if you do want that enabled. Now, with all that said, let's look at the start of this 45 kilometer, that was definitely not 45 kilometers by the end of it, hike. And you can see I've got the route loaded up there. Once I add that in, I can see a little breadcrumb trail of it. As I'm hiking along, I'll see where I am from a historical standpoint, as well as see the route up ahead and my current place in that particular route. I can crack open the map, I can zoom in and out, I can pan around, etc. All that works just fine. The one downside with Suunto's implementation of the maps, you can only zoom out to 500 meter radius, which is really, really small. If you go off course on your route, it'll basically just tell you you've gone off course and tell you the direction to go to get back on course. It's not routable, meaning the maps on this, they don't really know where you are from like a street name standpoint or trail name standpoint. In fact, there is no trail labels on any of the maps. There is the topographic lines that you can see there, the contour lines. But if you go off course, it's not gonna find a new trail for you. You just gotta find your compass heading and get back on course there. Anyways, I had no problems using this on my hike to navigate with. It was super easy to see in the sun when it was sunny out, and when it was dark out, it was obviously very easy to see because, again, that brilliant display. So what about battery life in sport mode? Now, Suunto has a couple different claims there. Here's the screen is showing what they are, but essentially what you need to know is a minimum of 40 hours with everything turned on. Literally how they phrase it, with all the things turned on, is what they say in the screen right there. So obviously I tested that. You can see on my big hike here, that was 12.5 hours long with all the things turned on, always on display, navigation, like everything was on there. And I started that particular hike on the Suunto Race at 86%, and by the end of it, it was a mere 62%, meaning I only burned 24% battery. This chart here, by the way, is from the DCR Analyzer. I'll link to it down below there. You can drag in files from Suunto and Garmin and Stages and Wahoo and Hammerhead, and it'll automatically show you that battery burn profile based on the data in the file. It's super cool and allows me to kind of compare these things side by side. So you can see using that extrapolation, you would have ended up with 50 hours of battery life, again, assuming nothing major changes by the end of it, which is well beyond their specs and super cool. For context at the bottom, here's the other units I was using. That included the Polar Vantage V3 and AMOLED display, as well as the Garmin Forerunner 965. Also the Coros Pace 3, but that's a MIP-based display watch without maps, so kind of a whole different ball game of battery life stuff. But still, you can see the Suunto burned the least out of all of them, and it's nice to see that Suunto isn't overstating their claims. So let's talk about some other claims, GPS accuracy. So starting off right here, we got a bit of a forest run, mostly like flat, but in the forest under tree cover the entire time. And at a high level, all these watches look pretty darn similar. The Suunto Race, the Garmin Epix Pro, and the Polar Vantage V3. There were a few scenarios where the Suunto was just slightly offset for just a brief period of time, and then there'd be a few scenarios where the Polar Vantage V3 was offset for a little bit of time. The Garmin Epix was pretty much spot on the entire time, but again, not too big a deal in the grand scheme of things. Then we've got a test where I started off in easier territory on what is effectively farmland, and then would eventually escalate to downtown city hell. So starting off with the farmland side of it, no problems. All the units were spot on there. As I started creeping closer into the cities, I went under overpasses and underpasses, or whatever the case is. I went under some big chunks of concrete. That's the long and the short of it. And in those scenarios, the Suunto Race was spot on, scary good in those cases. The Polar Vantage V3 struggled a little bit, but the Suunto was like really, really good there. Once I got into this downtown core, you can see it right here, big 20, 30-story buildings on both sides, arguably no different than running in Manhattan or anything like that. There's really only one section where it made a couple extra squiggles it probably shouldn't have for about 100, maybe 150 meters or so in length, and then it snapped back to exactly where it should have been. So, but again, these are crazy good GPS tracks for any GPS watch out there, and overall very impressive. So what about that 60-kilometer hike full of mountainsides and cliffs and all that kind of good stuff? I'm just going to pick some random sections here because, again, it's 60 kilometers. But if you look at my written review link down below, you can go through the entire data set, like literally meter by meter, and see how things perform. But at a high level here, you can see things obviously look just basically the same, no major outliers. And if I look at some switchback sections, again, things are spot on between all the units. They look very close between everything. Again, here another section where I got basically stuck on the roadway for a little while due to some trail overgrowth. It's spot on exactly where I was on the road, even the correct side of the road, which is kind of nice to see. From an elevation perspective, I started basically at sea level, right at the water's edge, or like 1 meter up from the water's edge. And then I ended at the water's edge. And you can see here's how all the units tracked over the course of the entire hike. The Suunto and the Garmin were like squished together perfect the entire time, most notably ending exactly at the same place they took off from and landed from an elevation perspective, despite being 12 and a half hours, and pressure systems coming through and going from day to night, and strong winds and all that fun stuff, temperature shifts, etc. They nailed that. So really good job from an altitude standpoint. And then switching up modes here, we got this outdoor cycling section in the mountains. I just want to show you the switchback section. The rest of it's all boring and fine, but this is also like really impressive. All these units were identical to each other on the switchback section, which is really steep mountain pass roads, and no problems there. Finally, for GPS, we get into the swimming side of it, open water swimming. And I've been doing a fair bit of open water swimming with this, and I'm not seeing amazing results. I see errors primarily when I pause briefly. For example, swimming buddy to catch up or just to fix my goggles, whatever the case is. That's when it loses GPS and doesn't seem to recover very well, very smoothly anyways, a lot of the time. So you can see here, this swim I did comparing to the Polar Vantage V3. The Polar nailed this compared to the swim buoy. You can see the swim buoy on the back of me. It's just a little buoy that floats there so boats don't move me. But it's also where I can put another GPS as a reference device. And you can see here, it was not the same as the reference device. And this is a trend that will continue the next day as well with the Coros Pace 3. In that case, both the Suunto and the Coros had troubles. And this is a pattern I saw as well when I swam a few times in Hawaii, that basically it would struggle in various areas where other watches did not. Anyways, let's look at heart rate accuracy. This section will be frankly a lot quicker. It's just not good. It's as simple as that. It wasn't good in the Suunto Vertical. It wasn't good in the watches before that, and it's not good here as well. You can see this right here if I look at this indoor cycling workout, which is actually probably the best workout of all the ones I'm about to show you. Indoor cycling is the easiest thing for optical heart rate sensor to track, and it struggles a little bit here and there. If I look at this next indoor cycling data set, see all those wobbles in the start there? That's not good. And it was also not good when the Polar Vantage V3 did the same thing, to be clear. Neither one of those is good. And you can see that pattern here on this one. Though to be fair to it, it did actually pretty well on the longer intervals. So you see these longer, I think there were 5-minute or so intervals. In that case, it had a better time warming up. I don't know what the deal was, but it did a better job on the longer portion of the intervals versus the earlier portion. Then there's this run from this past weekend. This was just a proper dumpster fire from both Suunto as well as Polar. Again, this should have been super easy. This was a relatively steady state, relatively easy run. And then every 2 kilometers, I would do 2 minutes at tempo pace. Not interval pace, not like hard intervals, just I would ease up the pace a little bit to a tempo pace for 2 minutes and then slow back down again. And it struggled enormously on all this stuff. Now, in this outdoor ride right here, it did pretty well initially, and then later on it was kind of a bit more messy, but all the units were messy because I was going downhill, which introduced vibrations, and it was cool air and all that kind of stuff. But still, if I look at all the data sets over the last month, most of them have some mess in them. There's not many data sets I can point to and go, oh yeah, that was great. It's not a great optical heart rate sensor. And virtually every reviewer out there has said the exact same thing about both the Suunto Race as well as the Suunto Verticals optical heart rate sensors, which are effectively, well, not effectively, they are identical, as you can see right there. The good news though is that on the whole, this watch is awesome. It's really as simple as that. I know I've got some nitpicking things around how slow the UI is, and Suunto says they're working on it, as well as the sensor side, which I hope they work on because that needs it, and then finally the heart rate. But if you set aside those 3 things, for that $450 price, it is astoundingly good. It is an incredibly competitive watch, especially when you compare it to something like the Garmin Forerunner 965, which sits at $599, or the Polar Vantage V3, which also sits at $599. Again, when Suunto announced the price for this watch, I did a substantial double take because it's so different than Suunto's MO from the past, which has always been to be, frankly, overpriced. And I think they're finally learning that they can no longer afford to be overpriced, which isn't to say they have a bad anything. They've got a great platform in the Suunto app, especially in the navigation side, their partners, and they've got great materials and design and style. I really like the look of this watch. It's a good watch overall. And I think the $450 price is spot on perfect. So anyways, there you go, a complete review of the Suunto Race. As always, if you found it useful or interesting, go ahead and whack that like button down the bottom there, or subscribe for plenty more sports technology goodness. With that, have a good one.